Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Limited video, let's discuss Computex 2019, shall we? At least before it begins. This is easily one of the most hyped and anticipated events in computing history, at least as far as I can remember. Sure, Nvidia, with the Turing architecture, did have a lot of excitement. After all, not only were there whispers of real-time ray tracing and drastic increases in performance, but Pascal was getting rather long in the tooth at that point, and people just wanted to know what the next generation of Nvidia GPUs were capable of. But compare that to the anticipation of Navi, and especially Ryzen 3000. I think Ryzen is probably more hyped than Navi. That's just my impression. Let me know if you feel differently in the comments down below. But it's just absolutely insane how excited people are for the Zen architecture. So in this video, what I think we can do is open a conversation between ourselves and kind of understand, or at least make some predictions of what the companies will be unveiling, whether we feel that they're going to hit the expectations that people have, and also just kind of having a fun bit of conversation between ourselves. We're going to start things out with Nvidia because, well, it just makes sense, because one of the actual pieces of news that's popped up today may actually impact AMD's plans, believe it or not. So, as we all know, Turing launched late last year, and there were some supply problems, particularly with the RTX 2080 Ti, which meant that even people who ordered the Founders Edition model actually had to wait a bit longer than what they expected. We also had some issues with ray tracing, and by issues I mean that there just wasn't exactly a lot of titles which came out that took advantage of ray tracing. This is starting to improve now, and I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think that DLSS is going to be a killer app for Nvidia. I think it's going to improve over time, and I hate to use the term, but I do feel it's going to be Nvidia's fine wine. But people were somewhat frustrated by the 2080 Ti pricing, and I think, honestly, the pricing was the thing that people were really annoyed about. I don't think it was the slowness of ray tracing. I think people wouldn't have minded so much if the pricing hadn't been so much different compared to the previous generation. Nvidia then wisely launched the GTX 16 series, which is Turing based, so you've got the Turing shaders, you've got the difference in level 1, in the cache, and blah 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 blah. But of course, the tensor cores and the ray tracing cores are bye. They're no longer present in the GPU, which is fair enough. It's a good way to lower the cost of the cards. But what Nvidia have right now is a very interesting situation on their hands, because AMD will almost certainly be announcing Navi. I don't think that they're going to hold this back for E3. I personally think that E3 is going to be like Lisa Su walking on the stage of at least Microsoft and explaining how AMD really loves gaming and how they are very happy to once again be partnering with Microsoft. That's my personal opinion. Who knows, maybe we'll hear some more information about Navi, but I think at the very least we're going to get some type of demo of Navi. So what that basically means is Nvidia don't want people to be like, okay, well, not buying that card anymore, like the RTX 2070, I'm definitely waiting for Navi. They want people to make those purchases, and the best way they could do that is to build hype and anticipation again. I personally would not be surprised if we see the following. We see a price cut in Nvidia's current lineup of cards. How drastic really depends on how much of a threat they feel that Navi is going to be. I also have heard from multiple people, and I've reported it actually, that we will see 16 Gbps models of Turing. No idea if it's going to be the entire lineup of cards, or whether it's going to just be a few select SKUs, or whether Nvidia are just going to slowly replace them over time. Who knows? It's also possible because the yields are getting better on the actual GPU cores. That's one of the reasons now that Nvidia are no longer doing like the A revisions of silicon, that Nvidia could, and I stress that word, could decide to increase the clock frequencies. I've not heard that that is being a rumor, but who knows? It's a possibility. Nvidia could increase the power limits. Who knows, right? But I think that that would be a good way to fight back AMD, to just increase the clock frequencies a bit in the core. Just for the sake of this video, let's say 150 megahertz would be astronomically high, so I don't think it's going to be that high, but 100 on the outside, and possibly with faster memory, and also at a slight cheaper price. That could take a lot of wind out of AMD's sails. The second thing is that there are some noticeable gaps in the performance and pricing structure of their current GPUs. Look at the cost of the RTX 2070 to the 2080, and also the 2080 to the 2080 Ti is actually quite a large jump. Nvidia could decide, therefore, to be like, hey, you know, we're going to fill these gaps out a little bit and also adjust the pricing. So the RTX 2070, for example, goes down 50 or 100 bucks. Let's say 50 bucks. They release the RTX 2070 Ti, which maybe costs like 50 more-ish than the current RTX 2070. So let's say that's around 500 to 550 US dollars. And then obviously you've got the 2080 and so on and so on. I think that's a pretty safe bet. Nvidia did have that "It's Coming" Super trailer a few days ago, but Super could also reference Tegra, because that is technically gaming, so who knows, maybe that could even be a Nintendo type of announcement. It could represent Quadro, although I highly doubt it because it was on the official GeForce YouTube account, and they wouldn't really want to cross the streams that much. I don't think it's going to be Titan, because Nvidia have really wanted to separate Titan and gaming as much as possible. In fact, reviewers were asking if they could have a Titan card for the purposes of, a game type of setup. For example, if they want to test like an insane setup for high-end gaming and they're asking Nvidia for a Titan card, a lot of times Nvidia will be like, no, actually that's what the RTX 2080 Ti is for. You can have one of those though, and not so keen on giving a Titan, because obviously if it's gaming, it's not exactly the best value for money. Also, another possibility is an RTX 2080 Ti that has a slightly wider bus. I've heard, and it's been commonly whispered in the industry, that we're going to see a RTX 2080 Ti with 12 gigabytes of memories and a slightly wider bus, because obviously 12 modules. So maybe they'll do that along with 16 Gbps for that. There's also, though, the other little bit of news that popped up from Nvidia, and that is that they have filed several patents in the European Union Patent Office, and those are of the RX 3080, 4080, and finally 5080. One of the long-standing rumours concerning Navi is that AMD would be calling the series of GPUs RX 30 blah. Maybe this will dissuade AMD for doing that. That is assuming Nvidia get the patent. At the moment, from what I understand, it's still waiting to be confirmed whether they are granted this patent. But obviously, there's good possibility that if they were granted the patent, well, AMD wouldn't want to go down that route. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of 3080 or RX 3070. I think it's kind of confusing for consumers. That's my personal opinion on that. I prefer the idea of them having the 600 series, but with AMD right now, it looks like we're getting a 600 series, which is essentially a rebrand of the 500 series. So, who knows? I guess they could have the 700 series and the 600 series coexist. Moving on to Intel, there are a couple of Intel things that I'm quite interested about. The first one is Intel Odyssey. They're going to be having a Computex Intel Odyssey. I believe that's taking place on the 29th. From my understanding, there's not going to be any huge announcements. They're certainly not launching the discrete GPUs this year. We all know it's happening next year. I also don't think we're going to get a rundown of specifications. I don't think Intel are going to tell us that much. I think it's just going to be, once again, getting community feedback and so on. I will completely and utterly admit I really want Intel to do extremely well in the discrete GPU arena, because I just am not happy with a binary choice, if you excuse the pun of binary in computing. I mean, technically, I really wish we had 3 major viable contenders in x86 as well. That would be great, but obviously that's not happening, so I at least want it with the GPUs. So, with any luck, we learn some details of what Intel are planning for the discrete GPUs, and we also have Project Athena from the company, which I suspect is going to get a lot of attention. If you're unfamiliar with Project Athena, it's basically Intel's initiative to get laptops, mobile computing up to certain spec, to a certain standard. So this would be things such as improving battery life, 5G connectivity, artificial intelligence, and so on and so on. So what Intel are hoping to do here is work with various manufacturers like Dell, HP, blah 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 blah, and ensure that all of these laptops meet minimum requirements. It's not like you have to do this, it's not mandatory for a company to do this, but obviously Intel would be rather happy you did and would help to market the laptop, and obviously you've got that nice sticker there which ensures that well, it's nice to have, right? It basically increases consumer confidence. I think this is a really good move for Intel. So with any luck, we learn more details about that, and laptops will start to roll out fairly soon with Project Athena. So in my opinion, that's pretty awesome. By far though, the company that gets most of the time in this video will be AMD, because we're expecting a lot more information on Zen 2, Matisse, that would also be Rome as well, the server CPUs, and almost certainly Navi as well will receive a lot of attention during their Computex. To that end, I have also created some polls which you can find linked in the video description. Just curious what everyone thinks is going to be the results of Computex. So it's going to be interesting to go back after their event and then check out the polls and see how reality matched up to our expectations. So that's just going to be a bit of fun for us. So with AMD then, we know that they are launching Zen 2 in some form or another. So then, there are two products that I'm going to be primarily focused on in this video. The first will be Navi, and the second we're going to discuss is Zen. So let's quickly go over the Navi information. We know that it's going to be an iteration of GCN, so it's not going to be an entirely new architecture. We know that Navi is going to form the basis, at the very least, of the PlayStation 5 GPU. According to Sapphire, there are two models that are being worked on right now by AIB, so that would be like MSI, Sapphire, and so on and so on. One will be a competitor to the RTX 2070, one will be a competitor to the RTX 2060. One is going to cost you $399, and the other one is going to cost you $499. I'm still uncertain whether those prices are going to be exactly what AMD will be launching these cards at. It's A, significantly more expensive than what we've heard before, and B, prices can change, and I think it might depend what Nvidia do unveil as well and what Nvidia's plans are. With that said, launching an RTX 2070 product at like $300 also never really sat right with me either. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was close to the $400 to $499 US mark for these cards. There are a lot of conflicting reports with Navi. One of the leading concerns apparently is heat and power consumption of these GPUs. We saw that leaked PCB, if it is really for Navi, that had two 8-pin power connectors on it. We can also see that the board itself appears to have the pin out there for GDDR6 memory. That's not surprising. After all, A, it's been a long-standing rumour that Navi will have GDDR6. Secondly, David Wang over at AMD confirmed that that Navi will either be targeting GDDR6 or HBM2. For regular consumer-grade GPUs, what would be the point in HBM? So I feel that they will indeed be GDDR6, 8GB of memory on a 256-bit bus. Unsure whether it will be 14 or 16 Gbps. I think it's probably going to be 14 from what we've heard thus far. And as for whether AMD will nail this or not, I think that they don't necessarily have to beat the RTX 2070 in terms of performance. They're probably going to do the whole thing of like, better in one game, worse in another game. Better in one game, worse in another game. What I do think they need to do, though, is just offer a viable alternative. Right now, they don't have one. The RX 580 still does fairly well. It actually beats cards such as the GTX 1060, but it also gets stomped by a card like the RTX 2060, which is obviously significantly more expensive. But even the 16 series of Nvidia just doesn't really allow the 580 to put up a fair fight, or the 590. Then again, AMD, to their credit, have already noticed this. They've dropped the price of the 580 and the 590, and they've also done something rather smart in that they are bundling a lot of game codes with their cards, and they're not bad games either. Like, they were giving away Resident Evil 2, and they were giving away DMC 5, and those are awesome games. The latest leak that I covered a couple of days ago is that there will be 2560 shaders inside the GPU, although there are a couple of architectural differences. They are no longer exactly 64 shaders per compute unit, but they're split up 32 times 2 inside the compute unit. There's also some significant changes because we have a lot more ROPs on the GPU, changes to the geometry as well. Apparently it's up to twice the geometry performance. There's also much greater pixel pushing power, not only because of the ROPs, but other fundamental changes inside the GPU. There's also changes to the caching structure, and so on and so on. Honestly, these leaks that emerged actually make a lot of sense, because I was told some of this stuff as well in private. Actually, I covered this around, I think it was late March. I put out a video detailing what one of my sources had told me. So this latest leak does appear to tally up with what a lot of I was told regarding Navi. So if AMD can fix these issues, which were definitely flaws with Polaris as well as Vega, it's going to be a lot of extra performance for them. It just remains to be seen how it's going to perform in the real world, and that's really the thing here, because AMD can show whatever demos it wants. At the end of the day, it's going to have to wait for us to get hold of the GPUs and do some significant testing. We actually know a significant amount more about AMD's Zen 2 processors, and even Matisse, because the company have acknowledged a lot more publicly than what they have with Navi. You can either take that as worrying for Navi, or just they're not ready to disclose the information. That's totally down to you which way you want to take that. As for Matisse and Zen 2, there's been a lot of stuff that we do know. Obviously, it's built on 7nm. AMD have publicly demoed Zen 2 and a engineering sample Matisse part that was at CES 2019. They had an engineering sample Matisse CPU up against Intel's i9-9900K with a very similar system configuration, and they pitted it in a benchmark which was Cinebench. I say it in such a tone because Cinebench and AMD just love one another. AMD really love the Cinebench benchmark. I don't really criticize them for that. It's just an application that AMD do extremely well on. Either way, for considerably less power consumption, AMD actually pipped the 9900K to the post. I did an analysis of what I think the clock frequency was running, what the Matisse part was running at. I personally believe it was in the low 4 GHz range. I guessed that because I also did some IPC testing with a Zen Plus processor. It was a 2700X, and I pitted it against an i9-9900K at 3 and 4 GHz. So one set of tests at 3 GHz, one set of tests at 4 GHz, and then you basically can do kind of a guesstimate of what you think that the clock frequency would be. With that information, you can basically extrapolate what frequency you feel that the engineering sample was running at, based upon the IPC gains that allegedly are going to be for the Zen 2 architecture. As for the IPC gains, that's where it gets super duper tricky. There was a 6-core 12-thread processor, assuming that was being read even remotely correctly on the SysOff Standard database. But the reason it's kind of a bit weird is because it was running at 3.3 GHz for that sample. And that would indicate that the IPC gains from Zen to Zen 2 are just astronomical, like 30-ish%. And the problem is, SysOff Standard just could maybe not be reading the clock frequencies correctly there. It's not like that's impossible. There's like an Ice Lake sample of it was running at like a 500 or 400 something percent overclock in one of the benches. It was running at like 6 GHz, and another it was running like way slower. So basically, sometimes the clock frequencies are being obfuscated, or they're just being read incorrectly just because the application can't just understand what's going on or whatever. So taking a figure and being like, hey, that's the IPC gain is kind of difficult. I've heard from multiple people, though, that IPC gain is going to be around 10% ish. And the reason I say ish, and most of you probably know this anyway, so you can recite it with me, everyone, it depends on the application. Some applications just suck at taking advantage of multiple processor threads. Others just do really well with one specific set of CPU usage. So in other words, it will really push, for example, floating point operations, or another one really might hammer the processor cache, or another one really might require a lot of low latency operations, and so on and so on. So it really does depend upon the actual application itself. That's why even some games do really well, for example, on the Ryzen 1000 series, yet other games just don't scale so well on Ryzen. And that's something that definitely software companies are improving. They've definitely started to optimize that. Another long-standing rumor with Ryzen 3000 series, of course, is it will go up to 16 cores. Indeed, I put out a video quite some time ago that one of my sources who gave me lots of the X500 information, which includes the 3200 MHz RAM support, includes the fact it's got PCIe 4 support. They told me that most vendors, that would be AIBs, such as motherboard manufacturers, as well as companies like Dell and so on, they were expecting AMD to go up to 16 processor cores for AM4, and that looks all but confirmed now. We've seen engineering samples that do go up to that. The question is not whether AMD can do it, technically, or they want to do it, it's when they will do it. The problem with the 16-core 32-thread part is that it's just going to decimate basically most HEDT processors, because the thing is, the CPU is A, running at considerably higher clock speed than most HEDT CPUs, and 2, it's theoretically anyway going to be way cheaper than a HEDT CPU. Who knows, maybe AMD will charge like $800 for the 16-core CPU. No one knows, right? I mean, there's the leaked pricing and all that, but AMD last minute could be like, ka-ching! But let's take the pricing out of the equation. The fact is it's going to basically nuke Threadripper 2000 series, and we've seen that Threadripper 3000 has been removed from the roadmap. So it's like, what's going on there? Is it that AMD feel that if they release Threadripper 3000, it's going to essentially render the Rome series in a weird position where people may not want to purchase it because Threadripper's got as many CPU cores and ridiculous performance? Like, who knows? With Rome, of course, it's up to 64 cores. We've learned that in the past. It's also possible AMD have just delayed Threadripper, or maybe they're waiting for Zen 3. I've heard multiple different theories, and I've come up with them myself. The bottom line is, though, that Matisse, even if, being at the worst case scenario, I'm talking doomsday level of worst case scenario right now, hits, let's say AMD go ultra conservative and only release an 8-core CPU for the first couple of months of the launch, which I've still been told is July. Let's say that they only hit 4.7 gigahertz. The reality is Zen 2 with an 8-core processor, which is running at around 4.5 gigahertz to 4.7 gigahertz, is probably still going to put Intel in an incredibly uncomfortable situation, and probably is going to make it so that you would just not want to buy any other CPU for gaming. Who knows? We're going to have to wait for tests, of course, because ultimately that's really what's going to decide things. Like, AMD could release a 400-core processor running at 22 gigahertz, and they could charge $2, but if it has major issues for one reason or another, then obviously you're still not going to use it. My personal opinion, though, is that Zen 2 is going to be a pretty darn good CPU. I think we're going to see up to 12 cores on launch. I've heard some people say that there will be a 16-core on launch. Other people say it's going to be delayed on launch for the 16 cores. So the 16 core is definitely up in the air, but I do feel that AMD will launch at the very least 12 cores. I've been told, once again, it's going to be up to 5 gigahertz for the 12-core model, and it's running at like 4550 megahertz so far with engineering sample. That's, well, actually it's more of a qualification sample for all CPU cores. Hopefully that pans out to be true, because if it is, that is a gargantuan amount of performance for users, and it's going to be a very interesting CPU to benchmark and put through different paces. With all of that said, though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Let me know what you're hoping for at Computex 2019. You can also subscribe to the channel, which helps us out a ton, and also share this video. But I'm going to let you all get going. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.